Welcome to another deep dive.
Yes, welcome everyone.
You know we love to do these, right?
That's right. We love to take these dense sources that are really hard to get through and boil them down for you so you can really understand the key information without having to, wade through all the details.
Yeah, like we spend the time so you don't have to.
Exactly.
So today we're diving into a paper, and it's a really, really fascinating one called Situational Awareness, The Decade Ahead. It's by Leopold Aschenbrenner.
Yes.
Have you heard of this one?
I have, yes.
Really, really interesting stuff. And our mission today is to extract those super crucial insights about the near future of artificial general intelligence.
AGI.
AGI, exactly. And we're specifically going to look at his analysis of compute trends, algorithmic improvements, and what he calls unhobbling gains.
Yeah, and I think what really makes this paper so interesting is that the central argument is that the next 4 years could bring about an effective compute scale-up that's comparable to the massive leap that we saw between GPT-2 and GPT-4. Yeah, I mean, if that happens, that's really going to mean a fundamental shift beyond just, using AI as chatbots and toward AI that can actually act as an agent in the world.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to unpack how and why this might happen.
Exactly. And we're going to, if you are someone who wants to really grasp these key developments in AI quickly and thoroughly and, maybe even experience a few aha moments along the way, then you are in the right place.
Definitely.
So let's start by looking at the recent past and just how fast things have already been moving.
Right.
And the author actually uses some really helpful comparisons to illustrate this. So he starts by talking about GPT-2.
Yeah, GPT-2.
And he describes it as being like a preschooler, right?
Right. Like it could manage some basic language tasks, maybe even surprise you now and then with a coherent sentence, but its fundamental abilities were quite limited.
Yeah.
And, things that we take for granted now, like counting or summarizing text reliably, were real struggles for it.
Yeah, like things a 5-year-old can do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And then came GPT-3, which he likens to an elementary schooler. So, stepping it up a little bit.
Right. So it's like, you see this significant jump in capability where now it can generate, basic poetry or weave more complex narratives, maybe even produce some rudimentary code.
Yeah, like it's starting to actually do things that are kind of useful.
Right. Like it can, follow instructions at a very basic level, so a clear step up, in terms of its understanding and its output.
For sure.
And then we got GPT-4.
The high schooler.
Yeah, the smart high schooler.
Yeah.
This is, where the landscape really started to shift because GPT-4 can tackle really sophisticated coding challenges.
Right.
It can reason through complex problems.
Yeah.
Even perform exceptionally well on, difficult high school level math problems.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I don't know if you've seen this, but it'll actually outperform human students on standardized tests.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
Yeah, it's wild. It's definitely a tool that a lot of people are now using for a whole range of tasks.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I use it all the time.
Yeah, same here.
But here's a really important point, though. Even with all of these, crazy impressive abilities of GPT-4, the author actually argues that a lot of the limitations of GPT-4 and these large language models aren't really due to a fundamental lack of intelligence. Instead, he suggests that these models are still, in a sense, hobbled.
Right. Like the core intelligence seems to be there.
Yeah, it's not fully unleashed yet in all the ways that it could be.
Right. And it's fascinating to think about, if you look at how quickly AI is approaching, and in some cases exceeding human-level performance across a growing number of domains, I mean, you really start to wonder about the untapped potential that might be in these systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think adding to that sense of really rapid change is just how consistently expert predictions have underestimated the speed of progress.
Yeah.
And the author highlights this by looking at the math benchmark, which is all about solving challenging high school mathematics problems. Predictions made just a year before significant advancements were way off, showing how quickly this field is evolving.
Yeah, the future in AI seems to be arriving much faster than a lot of people anticipate.
Yeah, for sure.
So with this rapid progress as kind of our backdrop, let's dive into what's actually driving this change. And the author focuses on what he calls counting the orders of magnitude, or OOMs.
OOMs, yeah. So this is where, I think the analysis gets really interesting, in terms of understanding, the trajectory of AI. So the author breaks down progress into 3, critical areas, and each area is measured in these OOMs.
Yeah.
One OOM just means a tenfold increase.
Right.
So the areas are compute, algorithmic efficiencies, and those unhobbling gains that we talked about earlier.
Right. So let's start with compute.
Okay.
And this refers to just the raw amount of processing power
Hmm.
that is being used to train these massive models.
Like the horsepower.
Yeah, exactly. And, what the author is emphasizing is that the current increase in compute is far beyond the historical pace of Moore's law. It's being fueled by just massive, unprecedented investments. Think about it, like spending millions of dollars on training a single AI model was once considered, totally radical, and now it's becoming increasingly common.
Yeah, totally. Like, over the 4 years leading up to GPT-4, we saw this huge surge in compute.
Yeah.
And it's significantly outpacing those earlier trends. So this like huge injection of processing power has really been like a major driver of the progress we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so then we have algorithmic efficiencies.
Right. And so this is about how clever the underlying algorithms are. Right?
Yeah.
So, allowing us to achieve the same or even better results with less computational resources. And so between GPT-2 and GPT-4, the author estimates that there was an improvement of 1 to 2 OMs in algorithmic efficiency.
So potentially like a 10 to 100 times improvement in how effectively we're using that compute.
Yep. Right. And that's a pretty big testament to the amount of innovation that's happening in this field.
Absolutely. Okay, and then finally, there are those unhobbling games, right?
Yes.
That we talked about earlier.
Right. And this is a really crucial concept to understand because it's about removing the limitations that prevent these models from fully expressing their underlying intelligence. So techniques like reinforcement learning from human feedback or RLHF, chain of thought reasoning, and giving models the ability to use external tools all fall into this category.
And RLHF in particular seems to have been a real game changer, right?
Yes, that's right.
Like the author points to research that showed that smaller models that were trained with RLHF could actually outperform much larger models that weren't.
Right. Think of it like this. The model has the raw intelligence, but RLHF is teaching it how to use that intelligence effectively.
Yeah, like teaching it how to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And how to learn in a way that aligns with human intentions, which is obviously very important.
Very important, yeah. Okay, so when we look ahead to the next 4 years, building on, what GPT-4 can do and those capabilities, the author is projecting an even more significant surge in these driving forces.
Yeah, so if you look at current trends and just the massive investments that are happening in AI infrastructure,
Mm.
I mean, people are talking about trillion-dollar compute clusters.
Trillion with a T.
With a T, yeah. So based on that, the author anticipates another 2 to 3 OMs of compute increase by the end of 2027. So that's potentially a 1,000-fold increase in just raw processing power.
In just a few years.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's crazy. And in terms of algorithmic efficiency, so that second kind of area of improvement, the expectation is for another 1 to 3 OMs of gains. So even if we see some diminishing returns, the intense focus on research in this area suggests that we're probably going to continue to see really significant improvements in how efficiently we can train and run these models. So a reasonable expectation might be around a 2 OM improvement.
Right.
Okay. But the truly transformative change, and this is the one that I think is the most exciting, is the shift from, the sophisticated chatbots that we have now to more like agent-like AI.
Right.
And that's most likely going to come from further unhobbling gains,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So like right now, even the most advanced models that we have, they have limitations. So they don't interact with computers as effectively as humans do. They struggle with, kind of that sustained reasoning over longer periods. And they often lack a persistent, personalized understanding of context.
Right.
But imagine if we can overcome those limitations.
Yeah, like if we can give these models better access to software tools, more control over those tools, if we can significantly expand their ability to remember and process information within a single interaction,
Yeah.
and even provide them with more thinking time during tasks.
Yeah, and we're already, starting to see hints of that. Like, have you seen there's this new language model that was able to learn a new language from a textbook within its context, like in the context window?
I think that was Gemini 1.5.
Yeah,
That's it.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
So we're already starting to see some of these things happen.
Right, and this idea of test time compute overhang is riddled here, which basically says that if you give a model more computational resources to think during a task, even if its initial training wasn't as massive, you can see a really significant boost in performance.
Yeah, it's like, you give someone extra time to work on a complex problem, they're probably going to come up with a better solution.
Exactly.
And this all leads to a pretty striking prediction, which is that by 2027, we could see the emergence of something that looks very much like a drop-in remote worker, like an AI agent
Yeah.
that could like join a company, learn its systems, collaborate with human colleagues, and handle projects independently over extended periods. And like you said, we're already seeing early prototypes that kind of hint at this possibility.
Right. And the author goes as far as to suggest that there could be this sonic boom in commercial applications.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because these more capable agent-like AIs
Mm.
are likely to be much easier to integrate and extract value from compared to the current generation of chatbots that we have.
Totally. So it's like, you can actually start to see the use cases.
Yeah, and this could lead to really rapid and widespread adoption across, various
Right.
industries.
For sure.
Okay, so now let's talk about a potential hurdle in all of this. We've got all this amazing progress, but there's this question of data
Right.
and the possibility of actually running out of, high quality internet training data.
Yeah. And that's a valid concern, right? Because, these models are trained on vast amounts of text and code that are scraped from the internet. But, the author does outline several potential ways to kind of mitigate this.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So one is to just focus on using higher quality, more curated data sets.
Another is to actually develop and use synthetic data. So data that is generated specifically for training AI. And then finally, there's the growing power of in-context learning, where models can learn new information directly from the input that they're given without needing to be explicitly trained on it.
Yeah. And he also makes this like really interesting comparison to AlphaGo.
Yeah, yeah.
So initially, AlphaGo learned by studying like human Go games,
Mm,
but it achieved superhuman performance by them playing millions of games against itself.
right, self-play.
Self-play, exactly.
And so this suggests that a similar kind of self-play mechanism could potentially allow general intelligence AI to overcome, limitations in the amount of training data that's readily available.
Yeah, fascinating. So, all of this kind of brings a sense of urgency to the author's analysis, which he really kind of frames in this section called "This Decade or Bust."
Right. So he's actually shifted his perspective towards, a shorter timeline for AGI. Yeah, and he's emphasizing that the key uncertainty lies in the total amount of effective computation that we can achieve, not just the number of years that pass.
Right. So, it's not just about time, it's about the actual scale of computation that we can bring to bear on this problem.
Right. And he argues that this decade presents this really unique window for incredibly rapid progress.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's because of the unprecedented levels of investment that we're seeing, the increasing specialization of hardware for AI. And he's suggesting that this rapid pace that we're on might not be sustainable beyond the 2030s.
Yeah, so it's like, this is the time.
Yeah, now or never.
This is the time. And he actually connects this to a chart by Matthew Barnett, which suggests that we might soon be able to bridge the computational gap with the total amount of computation used by, like, evolution itself over vast timescales.
Yeah, that's a really mind-blowing thought.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? And then to really drive home the potential magnitude of this change, he uses this analogy of the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb. And it's
Okay.
like, the leap in power between those two was just like enormous.
Right.
And it happened, relatively quickly.
Yeah, and so he's kind of highlighting the potential for these, similarly rapid and dramatic advancements in AI capability.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, but also super exciting.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely both.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about like one of the most transformative possibilities that the author discusses, and that is the automation of AI research itself. Like he thinks this could be a major, major catalyst for what he calls an intelligence explosion by the end of 2027.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where we get into the potential for like truly exponential progress.
Hmm.
And the idea is that a lot of the tasks that are currently performed by AI researchers, like reading scientific papers, designing experiments, interpreting results, those are all tasks that, sufficiently advanced AI systems could be really good at automating. Right.
So imagine millions of AI researchers operating on these vast fleets of GPUs. So potentially the equivalent of like tens of millions of high-end chips by 2027. And, the author actually provides a calculation that suggests that this could lead to a research capacity that's equivalent to 100 million human researchers,
Wow, yeah.
all working around the clock.
And potentially operating at much faster thinking speeds than humans.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling.
Right.
But, of course, there are potential counter-arguments to this idea of, rapid automation of research. Like, could there be these fundamental limits to how much algorithmic progress we can make?
Right?
Like, will the truly novel ideas become harder and harder to find?
Right. Will we see diminishing returns? Yeah. So, the author addresses all of these. And while he acknowledges that, ultimate limits probably do exist, he doesn't believe that we're going to hit them in the immediate future, given the current rate of progress. And he argues that the sheer scale of this automated research will likely help to overcome the challenge of finding new ideas,
Right.
and that the initial acceleration will be significant enough to outweigh those diminishing returns for quite some time.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that's so exciting about this possibility is that imagine, you have all of these automated AI researchers,
Yeah.
and they could potentially discover entirely new efficiencies, develop far better training methodologies, and rapidly test and iterate on all these novel approaches.
Yeah.
So this could lead to breakthroughs across, not just AI, but all sorts of scientific and technological domains.
Yeah, like the author compares it to those extreme optimizations that you see in like video game speed runs,
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
where, people are finding these like crazy ways to break the game basically.
Yeah. Right. Right. And so, the potential consequences of such a superintelligence emerging are profound. Like the author discusses the possibility of this like unprecedented industrial and economic boom that would be driven by, this accelerated technological progress and just widespread automation.
Yeah, like potentially leading to these like dramatically higher rates of economic growth than we've ever seen before.
Right. And of course, the implications for national security are also extremely significant. And drawing parallels to the decisive role that technological superiority has played in past conflicts, the author suggests that even, a relatively short lead in superintelligence could provide this decisive military advantage.
Which is kind of a terrifying thought, but it's something we have to think about.
Yeah, it's something that we definitely need to be aware of.
So this leads to a really, really critical part of the author's argument, which is the idea that the development of AGI and superintelligence is fundamentally a national security imperative for the United States.
Right, and he's not mincing words here.
Yeah.
Like, he argues that there is an urgent need to significantly strengthen the security around AI labs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, to prevent, other nations, particularly China, from stealing, these crucial model weights and algorithmic secrets.
Yeah.
And, he emphasizes that the current security measures that we have in place are just not adequate.
Wow.
And, he makes the point that if we lose, the blueprints, essentially, for automated AI research,
Yeah.
that could erase any lead that the U.S. currently has and trigger this, like, very dangerous existential race.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like he contrasts the, often relatively open environment of AI labs right now with the really stringent security protocols that you see in like national defense projects. And he even
Mhm.
points to like the super secretive practices of successful quantitative trading firms as a model for how seriously these secrets should be protected.
Right, because they have a lot to lose if their algorithms get out there.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's basically saying we need to take this just as seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he advocates for, this government-led project, and he's, specifically using that term project in reference to the Manhattan Project.
Right. So something on that scale.
Yeah, to manage the development of superintelligence. And, he argues that, government authority is necessary for a couple of reasons. One is, to ensure security. Two is to vet the personnel who are working on this. And three is to build out the massive infrastructure that's going to be required for all of this.
Yeah, and speaking of infrastructure, I mean, he does address those potential like roadblocks
Mm-hmm.
and, highlights supply side constraints,
Right.
and power being like a major one. He estimates a potential energy demand of like 10 gigawatts by 2028 to support these giant AI clusters.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of power.
So he's basically saying, we need to be exploring all available energy resources,
Mm.
even natural gas.
Right, and potentially adjusting, our priorities when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, at least temporarily in the name of, national security.
Right.
And of course, the need for increased chip production and, advanced packaging capabilities is also crucial. So, the author stresses that it's super important to actually build these massive computer clusters within the United States rather than relying on, potentially less stable regions.
Right.
So, but despite all of these challenges, the author actually sees this growing awareness within the US government regarding the importance of AI.
Right.
And he projects that, within the next few years, we're likely to see the beginnings of this project,
Right.
with secure research facilities, a rapid build out of the necessary infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there was definitely this like AI wake up moment in 2023.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think government awareness has been increasing ever since. So I think he's probably right.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, but even as we, focus on developing this super intelligence, there's this equally, if not more critical challenge of super alignment,
Right.
which is basically, ensuring that these AI systems that are far more intelligent than humans reliably act in accordance with human values and intentions.
Right.
So we need to find ways to control these systems that could potentially be, far beyond our ability to fully understand or supervise.
Right. And the author explains that the current alignment techniques that we have, which often rely on, human feedback, they just won't scale to superintelligence.
Yeah,
So we need to figure out, fundamentally new approaches.
totally new ways of thinking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he discusses this potential for, future AI systems, especially those that are trained with long horizon reinforcement learning, to develop these unexpected and potentially really harmful behaviors.
Yeah.
And so the default plan, as he calls it, is to basically, try to align these somewhat superhuman models that we're able to develop, and then use those models to actually help automate alignment research during the intelligence explosion.
Yeah, so it's like using AI to help us align AI.
Right, exactly. And so some of the techniques that he talks about, involve improving our ability to interpret, how these AI systems are thinking, being
Yeah.
able to manipulate their internal representations,
Yeah.
and making progress in this area iteratively.
Yeah, so it's like, trying to understand their thought processes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the stakes of getting this automated alignment,
Yeah.
right, especially during, this period of really, really rapid intelligence growth, are just incredibly high. Like the margin for error here could be very small.
Yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so, this all leads to the geopolitical implications.
Right.
So the author really believes that superintelligence is going to give, like, whoever has it, this decisive economic and military advantage.
Right.
And he says that makes the race to achieve it a critical matter for the survival of, the free world against, authoritarian powers like China.
Right. And he contrasts, the relatively open and collaborative nature of, how AI is being developed in the West with the potential for, less transparent and potentially less safety conscious development in more authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
And, while he acknowledges that China has a lot of strengths in infrastructure development, which could be an advantage in the compute race, he emphasizes the importance of the U.S. maintaining its lead in, those fundamental algorithmic breakthroughs.
Yeah, so it's like we can't just rely on having more computers. We also need to be the ones who are coming up with the best algorithms.
Right, exactly. And the author, he provides this like really stark characterization of the CCP regime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, to really underscore the potential dangers if they were to achieve superintelligence first.
Yeah, and it's something that, I think a lot of people are really worried about. So, he also raises concerns about the possibility of like this unstable arms race in superintelligence, and argues that there's this huge need for American leadership in establishing these international safety norms and preventing like proliferation of this technology.
Right, like drawing parallels to, what we've seen in the past with nuclear arms control.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like we need to be thinking about those same kinds of frameworks and treaties and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And his proposed strategy is interesting. He's basically saying that the U.S. should potentially offer a deal to adversaries once we achieve a decisive lead.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and basically, offer non-interference in exchange for cooperation on safety standards and, sharing the peaceful benefits of this technology.
Yeah, so it's like, we'll let you, benefit from this, but you have to play by the rules.
Right, exactly. And, ultimately, I think the author expresses this really strong conviction that, some form of significant government involvement in the development of superintelligence is not just likely, but essential.
Yeah.
And he argues that, acting sooner rather than later is crucial to avoid this potentially like really chaotic and dangerous situation.
Yeah, so don't wait until the last minute to try to figure this out.
Right. Exactly. And he also suggests that there needs to be this like international coalition of democratic nations to collaborate on the development of this technology.
Right, so it's not just the U.S. going it alone.
Right. And also this broader agreement to share the benefits of superintelligence with the rest of the world.
Hmm.
Drawing parallels to, historical initiatives like the Quebec Agreement and, the Atoms for Peace program.
Yeah, so it's like, trying to use this for good, for the benefit of all of humanity.
Right, exactly. So, in this deep dive, we've explored the author's analysis of just the incredibly rapid pace of AI progress, the very real potential for this like transformative leap in capabilities within the next 4 years, the profound national security implications that all of this brings, and his argument for a significant and proactive government role in managing this technology.
Yeah, and I think what really resonates with me is the author's sense of situational awareness. It's like these ideas that once seemed really abstract are rapidly becoming this tangible and urgent reality.
Yeah,
And there's this very clear sense of just how high the stakes are.
yeah, absolutely. And while the analysis is, very compelling, I think it's important to remember that there's still a lot of uncertainties.
Oh yeah.
And the potential consequences are immense. The
Yeah.
future of AI is undoubtedly going to require significant adaptation and probably some very difficult decisions on a global scale.
Absolutely. And I think, for you, the listener, we encourage you to, explore the source material yourself.
Yeah.
Delve into some of these related topics.
Yeah, because it's clear that the future is arriving really fast.
So fast.
And understanding these potential paths forward is just, it's more critical than ever.
Absolutely. So thanks for taking this deep dive with us,
Yeah, thanks everyone.
and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.